Hello YouTube. I want to get back to the so-called Dyatlov Pass incident. You can find my first video about this in the description, and there's a link. And I also want to tell you that I've been interviewed, and I think you will soon see some of the interviews on television in very popular programs. But right now I want to talk about continuous information that I receive from Russia and another new twist in this case. Basically, it's the version that the group of the tourists who perished in 1959 were subjected to radiation, and the need to conduct a new radiation examination. According to the former employee of the prosecutor's office of the Pavlodarsk region, whose name is Lyudmila Melnik. According to her, the investigator who had studied this tragedy, who had investigated it 60 years ago, Lev Ivanov, he wanted to publish his results in the draft resolution about the termination of the case. This was, but his bosses basically took out this paragraph about the conclusions that he had, and he was told to stop further work. Now, the criminal case about the death of the tourists from the Igor Dyatlov group, it was started by the prosecutor of the Ivdel, city of the Ivdel, Vasily Tempalov. After the first corpses were found on February 26, 1959, and it lasted 3 months. When he was trying to find out the circumstances of what had happened, Tempalov looked at the area, of the actual area of the incident. Now, in March of the same year, this case was transferred to the criminal case prosecutor of the Sverdlovsk prosecutor's office, Lev Ivanov. Years later, he headed the prosecutor's office of the Pavlodarsk region of Kazakhstan. And in 1975, the senior prosecutor of the investigative department in that area, in Pavlodarsk, was Lyudmila Melnik. And she found out quite a lot. According to her, Ivanov never told about the case of the Dyatlov group case, but Melnik herself had the chance to study materials of the investigations, which were at her disposal because of Ivanov. As she underlined, all the procedures 60 years ago were done in accordance with established standards of the Soviet jurisprudence. But everything that had to do with the full investigation, it was such a well-investigated case that it could become a teaching aid to the beginning criminal investigators. This is what Melnik said to an interview to the Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda. Everything was investigated. Very detailed interviews with witnesses. The clothing was examined. Everything. The examinations were done, and experts were again asked after that. Ivanov was a very detailed person, and he wanted to find out what the truth is. Lev Ivanov published an article, and in this article he mentioned that the first secretary of the regional committee of the Communist Party forbid further investigation and ordered him to seal the case. But Ivanov, on his own, did radiological examination, And there are notes in that draft about the order to terminate the case. Ivanov actually mentioned radiation, which was found on the clothing, and showed results of the examinations. But the clean copy of the order to terminate the case doesn't have that paragraph. It was taken out. Somebody from the top bosses took it out. They didn't want information about the radiation. So according to the opinion of the former prosecutor of the Pavlodarsk region, Ivanov was not allowed to study the hypothesis about the radiation, and he was ordered to terminate the case. Melnik is convinced that the presence of the radiation on clothing and some of the death traces, it is the biggest mystery of this case, the Dyatlov group case, the people who perished in 1959 on the Mountain of the Dead. The experts actually were trying to wash out radiation for 2 weeks, but the rate of the radiation was still crazy, and all the detectors or devices showed it. That's where the mystery is, she says, in the radiation. If we understand where it came from, we can understand how the tent was cut, and also the traumas that were found on corpses. Interesting that Ivanov, according to her, talked about this version of death of tourists from radiation because of the experiments of the new nuclear weapons. And that was in his article, The Mystery of the Fiery Spheres, which was published in the year of 1990 in the newspaper Leninsky Putin, Kazakhstan. What's interesting is Melnik said that during her life in Kazakhstan, at that time it was a Soviet Republic, she and others, they often observed fiery spheres in the sky, and this was because of the presence nearby of the spaceport Baikonur. And I want you, my listeners, to take a look at my video about Kazakhstan and the UFOs over Kazakhstan. It's a fascinating territory, and it's got a lot of secrets from the past and modern, and a very well researched UFO cases, because the Soviet top secret UFO research program sent scientists to that area. I have those documents. Very interesting. That was back in 1979. Now, in 2015, let's get back. I'm getting back to the Dyatlov Pass. In 2015, the investigative committee of Russia started researching this case of the dead tourists, and they used a very well-known criminalist, Russian criminalist, Vladimir Solovyov, and also people who work for the area, in the area and on this case. And one of them was a mountain climber whose name was Semyon Skrebach, who had more than 25 expeditions. And as a result of their activity was the conclusion of the criminal case about the death of 9 tourists in February of 1959 in the Idels area of the Sverdlovsk region. Skrebach signed it and marked it 5th of July 2015. According to them, the reason for the death of the tourists, or for the flight of the tourists from the tent, was the small avalanche, which Dyatlov and his group partially caused by cutting the slope during their preparations for the night. According to the criminalists, that fateful night in the mountains of the northern Urals, there was a front cyclone which moved from northwest to southeast. the movement of the front lasted not less than 10 hours and was accompanied by powerful snowfall. And the wind at that time was hurricane force, 20 to 30 meters a second. And the temperature went down to minus 40 degrees. So they say, the Russian criminals say recently, that if we take into the consideration that the snowstorm lasted all that day on February 1st, 1959, and just towards the end of the day just became stronger, and that is proved by the last photographs which the members of the group took, then putting a camp on the slope of the mountain was a fatal mistake, and the tragedy was inescapable. And this was put into this investigative work of Solovyov and Skrabach. However, the criminalists ignore the fact of the presence of radiation on the clothing of some of the group members. And interesting that this was not looked at during the 2019 new investigation, which was undertaken by the prosecutors of the Sverdlovsk area, headed by Andrei Kuryakov. Again, they think there are, there's one of three reasons for the tragedy: the avalanche, the so-called snow layer, or it's a dense layer of snow brought by the wind on the lee side of the slope, or the hurricane. Now, this dense layer of snow, often they have smooth edges with rounded shape and make a hollow sound. This is one of the reasons they thought it is. And so there are only two reasons. But they don't want to take into consideration any criminal explanation for the death of the group. Now, Ivanov found this radiation, high radiation, on certain areas, small areas of the three pieces of the clothing. Two of them belonged to Alexander Kalivatov, one to Lyudmila Dubinina. Now, the investigator thought that the tourists were subjected to some energy influence, and so he sent their clothing and some of the parts of the body, inner organs, to the Sverdlovsk Sanitary and Epidemiological Services lab for radiological testing. And the chief radiologist of Sverdlovsk, whose last name was Levashov, he confirmed Ivanov's assumption that a prolonged washing of clothing with water from the stream could significantly reduce the initial level of radioactive contamination in some areas. Interesting that one of the members of the Dyatlov group actually had encounters with radiation, and he was the Ukrainian Georgy Yuri Krivonishenko, which in the beginning of his career actually worked at a secret facility which produced components for nuclear weapons, and he actually was one of the participants who were eliminating the effects or consequences of the Kishtim disaster. This was the first real technical disaster in the Soviet Union where radiation dispersed in 1957. The scope of this disaster was so huge that a radiation cloud reached the big Siberian city of Tyumen. So before this fateful trip in 1959, Krivonishenko actually quit his work to be able to join the group. Later, his brother Konstantin said that his personal things which could create radiation, which could contain radiation, and could actually be used to find out this, to solve this mystery, those things were destroyed, because the mother, she always kept the suitcase with Yuri's things, jersey, his mittens, his hat, all those things that he used in his last expedition. And in the room there was a big portrait of Yuri, and during the day of this death, the mother always sat in front of the portrait and cried. And everybody was afraid of the suitcase, of course, because the things in it could have been radioactive, and they had a baby. But the mother, she lived with that suitcase until she was 83, and nothing happened to her. And when she died, they just buried that suitcase. And so this is one of the interesting explanations, possible explanations, for what might have caused the death, or attributed to the death of the Russian or Soviet mountaineers in 1959. I will keep you updated about other versions. It's a very complicated and now well-known, globally well-known case. Thank you.